Class is now in session. I am Professor Hockey, and today will be another Sharks weekly recap, this time of week 23. The Sharks had 4 games on the docket for this week, starting off with a quick 2-game road trip through Minnesota and Winnipeg, and they managed to win both of those games. The first one, a 3-0 pretty dominant victory over the Minnesota Wild, not allowing them to do much of anything. Martin Jones earning the shutout in that one, his 3rd of the year. And then the next day, with Aaron Dell in nets, it was a closer one, but the Sharks, thanks to the heroics of Joe Pavelski, just in the last few seconds of the 3rd period, managing to get the game winner there and winning it in regulation. And that, at that point, made it a 6-game winning streak for the San Jose Sharks. They flew back home and were to host the Florida Panthers, a team that they had already lost to once this season, and then they lose to them again, a 4-2 loss after Sharks legend Mike Hoffman got the game winner late in the 2nd period. The Sharks just could not close the gap in the 3rd period. Not much to worry about, as the Sharks then went on to host the Nashville Predators, a team that they had managed to beat already twice this season. But once again, the Sharks would fall 4-2. This time, going into the 3rd period, the game was tied, but the Sharks still let it slip away from them with a Philip Forsberg game-winning goal, and so the Sharks only claimed a 4 of a possible 8 points this week, ending the week in 2nd place in the Pacific Division, right behind the Flames, a single point. For the offensive contributors this week, the leading the way is none other than Marc-Edouard Vlasic. Never thought he'd actually reach the top of this list. I don't even know if he has even been here once. He may have been there once, but definitely not near the top. He had a goal and 5 assists on the week, so he eclipsed the 20-point mark with his 6 points this week, and that was double anyone else on the Sharks. Gustav Nyquist is next with 2 goals and 1 assist, both of those goals coming in the game against the Jets, so that was nice to see. He now is at 53 points on the year. Timo Meier with a goal and 2 assists. He hits the 60-point mark for the first time in his career. And then Joe Thornton as well with 1 goal and 2 assists, putting his point total up to 43. There were also 5 other players who had 2 points this week. If I'm not mistaken, I believe that was Marcus Sorensen, Joe Pavelski, Tomas Hertl, Tim Heed, and Kevin Labanc. For the news of the week, it has been more or less confirmed that Peter DeBoer has signed a multi-year extension with the San Jose Sharks, so he will remain coach unless, of course, he gets fired or terminated during his contract, which certainly does happen, but he has re-signed with the team, and some people might like that, some people might dislike that. There were a lot of people talking about potentially firing DeBoer earlier on this season because he wasn't really getting much mileage out of this very strong team, and that's really the thing with DeBoer. When he's given a very strong team, he's usually able to get a lot out of it. He's brought the Devils to the Stanley Cup Finals, he's brought the Sharks to the Stanley Cup Finals, but we've also seen throughout his history that when his team maybe isn't that great, he doesn't seem to get a lot of mileage out of that. And you might think, okay, yeah, a good team, you can bring them far, a bad team, you can't bring them far, but there are some coaches in the league that manage to take somewhat subpar teams and bring them a lot farther than you would think. For instance, Gerard Gallant of the Vegas Golden Knights just last season, and while a lot of that does come down to some strong goaltending, it is still quite impressive. You take a look at someone like John Cooper of the Tampa Bay Lightning this season. Yeah, it's great that he's going to have like a historic season, and you do have to give kudos for him to that, but even my grandmother could probably coach that Tampa Bay Lightning team to a top 3 spot in the Atlantic Division. So it's not necessarily the most impressive things, but DeBoer has looked solid. He has brought the Sharks to their first ever Stanley Cup final, so you do have to give him props for that, and I still think the extension's a pretty good move for Doug Wilson all around. Next is Evander Kane. Of course, he missed the first 3 games of this week, but he did return in that last one. He had been injured prior, but then he had some personal issues that kept him out of those first 3 games. He looked somewhat slow in the first game, which was not really too much of a surprise. Obviously, the fact that he has to get back up to game speed after missing a couple of weeks, but also what he did deal with when he was sitting out earlier on this week. So hopefully Kane can get reacclimated into the NHL speed. He still has a good 9 or 10 games left of the season, so he should be fine come playoff time. Finally, I will talk about the playoff clinching because the Sharks did not manage to clinch a playoff spot this week. They had If they had won either of these two last games versus the Panthers or the Predators, they would have clinched. The Minnesota Wild just yesterday managed to lose in overtime to the Islanders, so they technically are still, potentially able to pass the San Jose Sharks. But there's about a 99.99% chance that the Sharks do manage to clinch. It only takes one more regulation or overtime loss of the Minnesota Wild in their last 9 games, or actually, I think the Chicago Blackhawks could also have to lose in regulation or overtime as well, or just the Sharks getting a single point in any of their last few games. So it's basically all but confirmed, but I guess it's technically not mathematical. But Sharks, most of this season has been about preparing for the playoffs. I don't think it was ever much of a question. Maybe earlier on in the season when, it did seem somewhat shaky. I don't think it was ever really a question whether or not this team would make the playoffs. And it was always a question, how would this team perform in the playoffs? And while that didn't really scrap the regular season, because you still want to get first place in the Pacific Division to avoid the Golden Knights in the first round, it was never really the prime focus of this group. Class dismissed.